is that my sister's life will not have been wasted. And I know she will live on through her family and the lessons that she has taught us, and she will forever live through us. Her life, her road, ended in a dark place, and I'm hoping that somehow we will be able to find where she is, and that those who know where she is will help us find her.
Murder in the second degree. It'll be the judgment and sentence of the court as follows. Probation is denied, then is sentenced to state prison for the term prescribed by law, which in this case is 15 years to life.
On a cold February morning in 2009, a woman named Lesley Herring vanished without a trace. Her husband, Lyle, told the police she'd left after a fight and hadn't returned. But the more they looked into it, the more they realized this wasn't the simple story he was trying to sell. Lesley's phone was left behind. Her purse was untouched. And more than $26,000 sat dormant in her savings account, as though she'd walked away from everything she knew and loved. But here's where it gets chilling. A tiny slip of paper no bigger than a receipt from your average coffee shop would become the key to unraveling everything. In a world full of lies, it was something so small, something most would overlook, that would pull the truth into the light, forcing a killer into the corner. Lyle thought he could cover his tracks, but he didn't count on the one thing he couldn't control: the truth. Make sure you're subscribed to Silent Crimes HQ. Before we continue down this twisted path, hit the subscribe button right now. You won't want to miss what comes next. Lesley Herring seemed like someone who had it all together. She was 44, professional with a successful career, living a life many would envy. She had a steady job in a home security company and a stable marriage, or so it appeared on the outside. To her friends and family, she was known as thoughtful, reliable, and hardworking. A woman who loved deeply and expected the same in return. But beneath the surface of her quiet suburban life, there were cracks beginning to form. Lesley's relationship with Lyle, her husband, had grown tense over the years. Friends and family noticed the shift. The once loving couple had started growing apart. It wasn't the first time Lesley had tried to address it, but each attempt seemed to be brushed aside by Lyle. Lesley was more than just a woman tied to a man. She had dreams, aspirations, and an independent spirit. But something in Lyle had shifted, and Lesley was starting to realize that the love she thought she had been building her life on might have been a dangerous illusion. It was a day that should have been filled with love and excitement. February 2009, Valentine's Day, a time when most couples would be celebrating their bond. Lesley and Lyle had plans to head to Mexico for a getaway, but something went horribly wrong. The argument began as something small, a disagreement that quickly spiraled out of control. Lyle later claimed it was over something trivial, but as the hours passed and Lesley didn't return, it became clear that something was terribly amiss. Lyle's version of the events was a simple one. After the argument, Lesley had left. She packed a few things and just disappeared. But there was no phone call, no sign of her leaving, no flight tickets, nothing. Her belongings, her phone, her purse, her entire life, were left behind in the house as though she had vanished into thin air. And yet Lyle remained calm, almost too calm. He didn't seem frantic or worried. He didn't call the authorities immediately. Instead, he claimed he had gone to Mexico searching for her. But how could he have gone without reporting her missing? How could he have simply shrugged off her sudden departure when everything about it screamed wrong? Something doesn't add up, does it? Stick with us and make sure to subscribe. This case is far from over, and the shocking truth is just around the corner. As the days dragged on, Lyle's story began to crumble under scrutiny. His calm demeanor raised eyebrows. He had reported Lesley's disappearance to the police, but his story seemed like a carefully constructed narrative, too perfect, too rehearsed. He claimed she left after their argument, but there was one glaring problem. Lesley's personal items, including her purse, her phone, and over $26,000 in savings, were left behind. If she truly left him, why wouldn't she take her things? Why would someone simply walk away from everything they knew, everything they owned? Lyle's alibi wasn't as solid as he believed. While he was quick to point the finger at the idea that Lesley had just walked out, investigators began to ask more questions. Lyle had told them that he went to Mexico in search of her, but his travel arrangements seemed odd. There were no traces of Lesley in Mexico, no flight records for her, and most importantly, no sign of her even trying to leave. The inconsistencies grew too large to ignore. His timeline was flawed. The narrative he built around her departure began to look more like a calculated attempt to cover up something far darker. Just when it seemed like the investigation was running in circles, a small, seemingly insignificant piece of evidence turned the whole case upside down. It was a Starbucks receipt. It wasn't a piece of high-tech surveillance or a dramatic confession, but rather a simple slip of paper found in Lesley's purse, dated 2 days after she was last seen. This receipt was like a crack in the foundation of Lyle's perfect story. When investigators reviewed the footage from the Starbucks location, the truth came into sharp focus. There on the video was Lyle, alone. He had bought a coffee by himself, even though he claimed Lesley had left him days earlier. Why would Lesley have been missing for days, yet Lyle was seen casually grabbing coffee? The receipt wasn't just a drink order. It was a sign that Lyle's version of events didn't hold water. The small details started to add up. The calmness of Lyle, his lack of urgency, and now this receipt. It was as if the walls were closing in, but Lyle still hadn't realized that one careless move was about to undo everything he thought he could control. This is just the beginning. The truth is slowly coming into the light. If you haven't already, hit subscribe and follow the twists that will leave you speechless. With the Starbucks receipt now in the hands of investigators, Lyle's carefully crafted story was beginning to unravel. But it didn't stop there. The receipt alone was damning, but as authorities dug deeper, they uncovered more disturbing evidence that painted a clear picture of guilt. Lyle had made several frantic internet searches leading up to Lesley's disappearance. Do I need a passport? Which country do I flee to? His online trail left nothing to the imagination. It was as if he knew the clock was ticking and he needed a way out. Yet the more they uncovered, the more his alibi crumbled. Cadaver dogs sniffed through Lyle's vehicles, alerting investigators to traces of human remains. They had found enough to suspect that Lyle wasn't just involved. He was responsible. But the clincher came from the neighbors. One reported seeing Lyle hauling a large rolled-up carpet from his home the night Lesley vanished. What could possibly be inside? A body? A secret wrapped tightly hidden from the world? The inconsistencies piled up. The search for Lesley had now turned into a search for the truth, and it was becoming more clear by the minute. Lyle was guilty. The case that once seemed like a missing persons mystery was now a murder investigation, and Lyle's every move had led investigators right to him. Shocked by the web of lies. The truth is coming faster than Lyle ever expected. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the twists that will shake this case to its core. As the investigation delved deeper into Lyle's life, it became clear that the man Lesley had trusted with her heart was not who he appeared to be. Beneath his charming exterior, Lyle had been hiding secrets that would have shattered the image of the perfect husband. While Lesley worked hard to build a life they could share, Lyle had been spinning a web of lies, quietly unraveling everything he claimed to value. Neighbors began to recall strange behaviors, like Lyle's odd insistence on locking the doors and blinds at night, even when there was no need. Others spoke of his unsettling detachment when talking about Lesley. There were whispers about his affairs, his gambling problems, and even his occasional outbursts. He had a temper, one that Lesley had started to fear in the months leading up to her disappearance. But there was something else, something darker. Lyle had been planning for an escape long before Lesley ever left. It wasn't just the online searches for fleeing the country, but the quiet preparations for a life without his wife. A man who once swore to love her was now preparing to vanish from the life they had built together, as if Lesley was nothing more than an obstacle standing in his way. The lies, the manipulations, the coldness, it all painted a picture of a man who was not just guilty of murder but of a life built on deceit. The pressure was mounting, and with each passing day, the evidence against Lyle grew undeniable. The receipts, the online searches, the neighbors' testimony. It was clear that his story didn't match the reality surrounding Lesley's disappearance. As the investigation closed in, Lyle's calm facade began to crack. For a man who thought he could control everything, the truth was now slipping through his fingers. On a crisp fall morning in 2013, after months of relentless digging, the inevitable happened. Lyle was arrested. The man who once seemed so sure of his perfect alibi now found himself in handcuffs, his world collapsing around him. The charges? Second-degree murder. The evidence? Overwhelming. The arrest wasn't just a formality, it was the final act of a play where Lyle had desperately tried to be the director, but it was the truth that had stolen the spotlight. The courtroom would soon become the stage where Lyle would be forced to face the consequences of the lies he had spun for so long. But for now, all that remained was the silence. The silence of a man who thought he could get away with murder, but who would now have to answer for it. This is where the story turns for Lyle, but the twists aren't over yet. If you want to stay on top of this shocking case, hit subscribe now. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. The day Lyle Herring stepped into the courtroom, the weight of the evidence against him was undeniable. The trial began, and with each passing day, the details of his dark secret life were exposed for the world to see. His defense was weak, a mere shadow of the lies he had woven. He tried to downplay his actions, to frame the situation as an unfortunate accident, but the jury wasn't buying it. The circumstantial evidence stacked up. His online searches for escape routes, his lies about Lesley's departure, the receipt that proved his alibi was a lie. But it wasn't just the receipts or the search history that sealed his fate. The emotional toll of Lesley's disappearance on her family was felt in every corner of the courtroom. Lesley's family members, her friends, her loved ones, each one testified about the kind, loving woman she had been, the life she had built, and how that life was stolen in an instant by a man who had promised to protect her. As the prosecution laid out their case, it became impossible for Lyle to maintain his innocence. The truth was louder than any words he could say in his defense. With each revelation, Lyle's world grew smaller, and the chances of escaping justice grew slimmer. Lesley Herring's body was never found, but her story didn't end in the courtroom. Her family and friends held on to a hope that never truly died: justice. Her tragic end left a hole that could never be filled, but in that same emptiness, a legacy began to take shape. The woman who had once been just a wife and sister became a symbol of the importance of truth, the strength of perseverance, and the fight for closure in a world that doesn't always offer answers. Lesley's memory lived on through the actions of those who loved her, each step toward justice a reminder of what she had lost. Her family, though heartbroken, knew that her life was worth more than the silence that had surrounded her disappearance. And while they could never bring her back, they carried her spirit with them, ensuring that her story would be told. In the end, it wasn't just about finding a killer. It was about honoring the woman who had been taken far too soon, whose life was cut short by someone she had trusted more than anyone. The truth, as it always does, came at a cost, but it also left behind a powerful message. No one's life is ever truly forgotten, no matter how much silence surrounds it. In the end, it wasn't the grand gestures or dramatic moments that solved the mystery of Lesley Herring's disappearance. It was the smallest of details. The Starbucks receipt, the forgotten online searches, the neighbor's observation, that cracked open a story that seemed impossible to unravel. Each seemingly insignificant moment, each overlooked piece of evidence, came together to expose the truth behind a man's attempt to hide his crimes. It serves as a powerful reminder. Details matter. What we often ignore or dismiss can be the key to uncovering a far bigger picture. In this case, it wasn't just about finding a body, it was about piecing together a life that had been stolen in silence. Lyle Herring thought he could escape, but it was the very things he overlooked that ended up sealing his fate. The power of the details is that they don't lie. They speak louder than words, louder than any carefully crafted alibi, and they carry the weight of truth, no matter how hard someone tries to bury them. What's lurking in the details around you? Stay tuned for more stories where truth hides in plain sight. Subscribe to Silent Crimes HQ, because sometimes the smallest things can change everything.